Okay, so you're gonna do a semi-structured interview, but you're unsure about what questions to ask. First of all, you're not alone. Asking the right questions is quite an art form. And second of all, this video will luckily give you 5 types of questions that you should ask in a qualitative interview. I should also note that these types of questions are especially valuable if you're doing some kind of ethnographic interview or your initial research in a paper or a new project. We're going to start off with the type of question that you should start your interview off with, which I think is pretty clever. So these questions are some you should ask before your official interview starts. So these have a more conversational nature and could sound like, how was your weekend? Or, oh, I like your shoes, where did you get them? It could also be, oh, I see you drinking coffee. Oh, well, this is tea, but I see you drinking coffee. Do you drink that like black or with a bit of milk or sugar? And then they could say, well, just with a little bit of milk to take the edge off, and so on. That helps create rapport with your interviewee and makes them a little more at ease and will create a great start to your interview. So for the actual interview itself, we want our interviewee to give nice and long answers. As I talked about in this video, the more our interviewee speaks, the more puzzle pieces we have to assemble the whole picture. To do that, we can use what Spradley calls grand tour questions. So these are questions that will solicit long and descriptive answers from our interviewee and will give us a general idea about what they find significant. So a typical grand tour question could sound like, how does your typical work day look like? Or could you describe what usually happens in this room? However, avoid questions that are too broad, like, could you please tell me your life story? Because we still want the answers and hence the questions to be about or have a particular context. Another type of questions you should be asking are example questions. So these are questions about a specific day or a specific event or a specific item, etc. So that could be questions like, could you describe the last time you went to the doctor's office? Or could you give me an example of how you use this app? These are questions that allow more specific details about your interviewee's experience, and they are also really great to ask after a grand tour question. Because you're asking them to recall a specific experience or describe a specific practice, then they are more likely to describe it in detail. And that lends itself to the next type of questions that you should be asking, which are follow-up questions. Now, follow-up questions, also known as probing questions, are a little harder to prepare. It's questions like, so how was that experience for you? Or what did you do after that happened? And they're used to make your interviewee elaborate more on their initial answer. These can both be used if your interviewee's answer was a little short and you want your interviewee to put more words to their experience. They can also be used if your interviewee is describing very factual events and you want them to talk more about how they feel or think about those events. You can ask questions like, what did that make you feel? Or what thoughts went through your mind when that happened? Follow-up questions can also be used after your interviewee has answered a grand tour question. So if your interviewee has described what a typical workday looks like for them, you can then ask about a specific task or specific routine that they mentioned. So in this context, a follow-up question could sound like, oh, you mentioned that you have a check-in meeting every morning at 9. Who attends that meeting? So there you grab on to what the interviewee has said as an answer for instance, a grand tour question, and then you ask further questions about that specific event that they have described. Now, follow-up questions, or any type of question for that matter, shouldn't interrupt what your interviewee is saying. So for instance, if you've asked a grand tour question and your interviewee is telling you about their day, and they say, so the first thing I do when I come into the office in the morning is grab a cup of coffee and then I go to my desk, because at my desk I have notes from the previous day about which tasks I need to look at today. And then if you interrupt them right there and then ask, oh, what type of tasks could that be? Which is a very good follow-up question. But if you interrupt them right as they are trying to answer another question, the grand tour question, then you are defeating the purpose of the Grand Tour question. So let your interviewee speak, let them tell you about their day, and then you can always later ask them about the specific things you want to know about their day. If you want more examples of follow-up questions, check the description on how you can get a hold of this very helpful cheat sheet. Closing off these 5 types of questions is the type of question you should ask at the end of your interview. Again, a stroke of genius I had there. At the end of your interview, when you don't really have any more questions you want to ask your interviewee, you should still ask this question. Is there anything that you want to share or that you find relevant that I haven't asked you about? The intention of this question is, of course, to let your interviewee point out things that have been a blind spot to you and therefore you haven't asked about. Also, asking this question can put your interviewee in an empowering position, because by asking the question, you are indirectly telling them this very true fact, which is, you're the expert. I'm just trying to understand. Is there anything I have missed? Of course, this should not only come across in this final question, this should be the foundation for the whole interview and your whole research, because they are the expert and they are helping you to understand, so treat them as such. Speaking of all these questions, I actually have a question for you. If you think about the qualitative research project that you're doing right now, or one that you have done in the past, what is one of the main obstacles that you have encountered? I would really appreciate it if you share that in a comment below, and give this video a like if you found it helpful. I would really appreciate it if you would leave that. I would really appreciate it. I would really appreciate it if you share that in a comment below and give this video a like. No? I don't believe it.